Why does your first draft suck and how to make it better? What is the process for how to bring a really rough draft to a masterpiece? And today in this video, we're going to hear from some of the greatest writers that I'm a fan of and that hopefully you are a fan of as well. We're going to talk about how these writers were able to bring their writing basically from point A to point B to point C, B, and A, as far as the process for how it took, or what it took rather, to make a really bad rough draft, a great story, but a bad first draft, to a finished product that publishers and readers all around the world were going to want to read. In addition to that, I hope you guys will subscribe to this channel. Please hit that like button, and please check out all the literary playlists that we have down in the description below for more awesome videos like this. And first and foremost, let's get into some of the books that I will point you to because this is a bookish channel and I want to encourage all the great stuff that I've been reading that you all hopefully will like to read as well in terms of the topic of this video. And the first one is The Story of a Novel by our good friend Thomas Wolfe here, one of my favorite authors. And in this, he talks about the struggles and the uphill battle that he had to not only write his novel, but get it published, and the writing process in general. We're going to be talking quite a bit about Thomas Wolfe in this video as well. So make sure you guys check out Story of a Novel by Thomas Wolfe. Now, writing book number 2 is Ernest Hemingway's On Writing. You could probably find some of these quotations on Google, but I definitely recommend just getting the book version. Books are always better than trying to read and keep track of things on the internet. Now, the first draft of anything is crap. That came from our good friend Ernest Hemingway. And Ernest Hemingway, although he wrote simply, although his novels were not super, arduously long, they did take a long time to write. Even his short stories, he labored over them, almost like chiseling at a stone sculpture. And his masterpieces like A Farewell to Arms and the Old Man in the Sea and For Whom the Bell Tolls and the Nick Adams stories and all these great legendary Ernest Hemingway literary content was not written, overnight. It took many months and many years sometimes to get the words right, to quote the master himself. And number 3 is another Thomas Wolfe book called Thomas Wolfe Interviewed. Now, this is not strictly about writing, but it's mostly about writing. He talks about the creative process. So this is Thomas Wolfe Interviewed. If you want to hear more about Thomas Wolfe's creative process, I definitely recommend Thomas Wolfe Interviewed. And the 4th book that I will encourage everybody to read is Jack Kerouac's Windblown World. This is the journals of Jack Kerouac, ranging all the way from his early career all the way till after On the Road. I think this might be actually primarily while he was writing On the Road, if I'm not mistaken. Edited and sort of packaged by Douglas Brinkley, a really interesting American historian. So let's get into it, and specifically let's talk about Jack Kerouac, or the myth of Jack Kerouac, that he sat down and got high and took benzos and weed and coffee and wrote On the Road in 2 weeks. There's a little bit of debate whether or not that is true, but most of that is myth. No, he didn't just sit down and write On the Road in 2 weeks. The sort of, maybe that particular version aesthetically or stylistically came upon him over the course of some really, drug, alcohol, caffeine induced creative weeks that he had in the early 50s. But as far as the overall process of Jack Kerouac, he spent many years and many months revising On the Road to get it to where to a finished, polished piece. So that is sort of a detrimental myth, sort of like the Kerouac-Bukowski myth that they just sat down and wrote novels in the course of a week or two. It's not really possible. I'm not saying it's impossible unless you can spend a full 24-hour days unintruded upon, as Charles Bukowski so famously stated, that if you quit your job, then that way you're going to have time to write things down on paper. But overall, novelists do not just sit down and type or handwrite a masterpiece novel, especially if you're handwriting. It takes months and years to really construct a novel. Unless we're talking about somebody like Stephen King, he's got fairly unintruded upon life. He's got full 24 hours to write. Not that he writes for 24 hours. But anyway, going back to Kerouac, the process of really writing a novel is documented quite well in here, and he was supplemented his literary efforts along with constant journaling and reflecting on the history of literature and sort of the trajectory of the future of where literature was going at that time. It was responding to not only his own creative process, but also to the sort of creative process of other writers that he was not necessarily trying to emulate, but that he knew he was competing against. And also, every great writer has an editor. That's a whole topic for another video. The Kerouacian myth of sitting down and getting really high or drunk, writing on the road, or even writing the Dharma Bums, or writing, the Neal Cassady content. It is primarily a myth, overshadows the actual work that these geniuses, yes, they were talented. They could write a lot of novels. They could write brilliant novels in short periods of time, but they did not just come out of a creative genius vacuum. I mean, yes, the initial energy, like Thomas Wolfe, for example, he talks about that exclusively, or extensively rather, in Story of a Novel, how the creative process sort of built in him, and there was like this resistance for many months and weeks and years, and all of a sudden, like a cascading waterfall or a dam that just had broken creatively and spiritually, it all came pouring out of him. And yes, there is something to be said for that initial creative act of putting pen to paper, putting fingertips to the keyboard, to the typewriter. But after that, that's really where the work begins. The author, the writer, does not just stop at that finished first draft masterpiece that's never been read or never been seen before. No, that's when the editor comes in. That's when his friends and family and his peers and his friends and his literary agents or whatever really take his first draft and really, lend some realistic criticism to it. Every great writer from Hemingway to Thomas Wolfe and Maxwell Perkins and Jack Kerouac and his editors, it is a collaborative effort. There's very few authors that can or should just write novels or content or poetry or anything and just put it out in the world without having some type of a process that goes through it. And personally, for me, I'm working on my novel. We've been working on it. We're on the fourth draft. It's going to go into a fifth draft because that's necessary, possibly another draft. And I do want to get it professionally edited just to have, some professional, second eyes on it, or third eyes even. So it takes a lot of patience to write a novel, and the creative aspect of artistic people like me and Thomas Wolfe and Hemingway, not that I'm comparing myself to them, but my novel's pretty darn good. And you guys will find out when the time comes, when it comes out, that there is sort of this push and pull between the creative writer becoming a little too much in his head, thinking that his stuff is great and thinking that he can be his own self-editor even, which is partially true. You should be your own self-editor, but it should not stop with your own self-editing or with your, you should really be trying to make your novel as best as it possibly can be. And some of the greatest writers in history, like Hemingway, like Wolfe, like Jack Kerouac, have showed us that it takes editors and people to read your stuff to bring it from point A to point B. And yes, Kerouac and Hemingway and Proust and Jack Kerouac and even Charles Bukowski, yes, they are the people, they are the creative force, the creative genius, so to speak, behind the finished product, but they didn't just do it alone. It's like that music commentary guy George Howard from the university in New Orleans talked about how Kurt Cobain didn't just sit around writing songs and playing basements his whole life and hoping to get discovered. No, he went out there and toured, and he got the attraction of record labels, and he played in front of some of his favorite bands and collaborated with people. So it's a collaborative effort. Any creative endeavor is a collaborative effort. So let's jump a little bit to discuss Jack Kerouac. Let's talk a little bit about Ernest Hemingway's creative process. Ernest Hemingway wrote primarily in the morning, sometimes not, but he also wrote standing up, also similarly to Thomas Wolfe, just to really get himself going, get those creative juices flowing. And if you actually look at like the before and after, like one of the editions of Farewell to Arms that we have, I think we talked about it in the Farewell to Arms analysis, you can read Hemingway's pre-edited, before he actually went through extensive editing and self-editing. He was a great self-editor, by the way, and you can see the evidence of this by looking at sort of the before and the after and the different parts, and even the ending of Farewell to Arms, and the ending in particular that Hemingway spent many weeks on to get the words right. And one of the journalists asked, well, why did you spend a whole 2 months writing the last chapter of A Farewell to Arms, or the last paragraph? And Hemingway simply says, to get the words right. And that's just a brilliant, beautiful exposition, or example, I should say, of what the power of words. And sometimes you have to wrestle with them. And it's like Hemingway says, where you're like a stone carver, and you're sitting there chipping away, day and week after month after year to really get the words right. And though Hemingway is stylistically different completely from Thomas Wolfe or Jack Kerouac and some of the other writers that we've discussed on this channel, the reason why his novels are so beautiful and his short stories are so profound is because he chiseled away at them day after day to get the perfect arrangement of words. We're also reading another great book about writing currently called On Writing by John Gardner, and he talks about how this process of the great writers is something that we should be inspired by, and you should not be comfortable with just a first draft or even a second draft. John Gardner says that you should really take, a 30-page, 30-page short story and work on it for 6 months till it's perfect and flawless, and you're going to be the best writer in town. Nobody will be able to beat you. And that is the attitude that we all as authors need to have, especially nowadays where there's so many self-publishers and everybody's competing to get an agent and a publisher, and everyone wants their grandmother to read their stuff. But how are you going to get your grandmother to read your stuff if you've only worked on one draft? You have to really sit down, and whether it's your grandmother or anybody in your life, if you want to get a really strong reader base and really impress people from the first page all the way to the end, yes, you've got to sit through not only a first draft, but also a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, and sometimes a sixth, sometimes like Anna Karenina, Leo Tolstoy, a ninth or a 10th draft. Hopefully you've got an editor. You should be saving money, to get a third-party publisher. It can be a freelance editor, reviser. You don't have to get the top editors in the world. But even before you get to that stuff, like the great masters that we've discussed in this video, Wolfe, Hemingway, Proust, and Bukowski, and Hemingway and Kerouac, they sat with their novels before they even imagined sending them off to other people, except for the exception of Thomas Wolfe, who we should discuss a little more as far as how when he first wrote his mammoth Oh Lost, which was originally the original title for Look Homeward Angel. It was this gargantuan, really thick, unrevised, wild, untamed masterpiece, and it took master editors and people like Maxwell Perkins and later on Herbert Aswell to really bring his colossal, insanely long, complex wise, and just really untamed, unhinged, we could say, undeveloped rough drafts to really bring a really solid masterpiece out of it. Yes, Thomas Wolfe's original writing was brilliant. Yes, Hemingway's original ideas were brilliant. The original scroll, quote unquote original scroll of Jack Kerouac's On the Road was also brilliant, but it took a collaborative effort to get these wild, untamed first drafts to really bring them to a finished product. It took really talented, patient editors. And Maxwell Perkins worked with Thomas Wolfe for sometimes a year or 2 years, 3 years to get, like Of Time in the River out. That book was insanely hard to write and condense down, not only because Maxwell Perkins was trying to cut down on Thomas Wolfe constantly wanting to add things, and Thomas Wolfe's gargantuan vision and his tendency to overwrite. Thomas Wolfe had trouble sort of condensing his huge themes and his huge grandiose worldviews down to something that was digestible. Even David Foster Wallace discusses how when he pitched Infinite Jest to his editors or his agents, that they were going to take something that was very, very long and very sad and very almost inaccessible and make it more accessible for the mainstream reader or for the common reader, perhaps. All the things that we're discussing is not to discourage you that you should dumb your writing down and that every novel you write has to be like, you know, A Farewell to Arms, The Old Man and the Sea, but we can take some of the genius techniques of somebody like Hemingway, and we can see how the reason why his prose came out the way it did and the reason why he was able to invent a new style completely. Originally it sort of came from journalism, just sort of these short declarative sentences. Hemingway stated several times that all you have to do is write one true sentence. Don't write sentences that are not true. So this process of finding your style really comes from the editing. Yes, you have a lot of freedom in the initial writing or the initial typing, the initial regurgitation of creativity, but really making your writing unique and making your writing your own really is only a result of really judicious and strict disciplined self-editing. And hopefully if you can be blessed with somebody else to help you edit and sort of you know, analyze your manuscript, all the better. But you have to be the strongest advocate for your own writing and never be settled, never settle for a word or a sentence or a chapter or an entire novel for that matter, or even one little minute word or comma that seems out of place. If you read something and something in the back of your mind is saying, I can write this better, I can make this catchier, I can make this less wordy, then you must go for it. So I hope this video inspired all the writers and also the readers out there to find not only the types of books that you like to read and why you respond to certain styles, people, but hopefully if you're reading a lot of books, you're also writing. And that's partly why we've been talking about the novel that I've been writing for years and years and years now. Everybody's wondering, well, where the hell is Andrew Marlowe's novel? It is coming, but it's, you know, like these great masters, we've had to spend years. And, you know, I don't have a full-time, unintruded upon 24-hour day to write. You know, I have to write in my off hours, you know, when I'm on the weekends or when I don't have class or when I don't have school. But I've managed to show up and work on my novel at least 4 or 5 days a week, which is plenty of time, you know, to get a novel done. But it's even working 4 or 5 times part-time on a novel for, you know, nearly 5 years now, what has not been enough for me to finish it because I see the flaws in it. I want it to be better. And yes, it is a very long novel. It's like almost 500 pages. So, you know, you have to take it in chunks. If you have this first draft, you know, really start going back in there like Michelangelo working on the Pietà, you know, and just don't rush your creative writing process. Spend as much time on it as you possibly can, and you will thank yourself. Your readers will thank you. The critics will praise you because they will know that you, like these great masters, Hemingway and Bukowski and Kerouac and all these guys, that you followed in their footsteps and you created the best literary work that you could possibly make. So thank you so much for watching this video. Leave your comments down below. Do you think first drafts are hard to get through? Do you feel like we should encourage more writers to stick with first drafts, or do you agree with me and you should, you know, have 5 and 6 and 7 drafts like some of the greatest masters in you know, American literature have achieved? So make sure you guys share this video with all your literary friends. Let me know if you have any questions about books or content. I'm going to leave all the playlists or leave the link to the playlists so you guys can check out the different literary playlists. And please leave your thoughts down below about Thomas Wolfe and Hemingway and Kerouac and all these great masters that we've sort of briefly discussed. If you want to see a deep dive into Kerouac or some more, you know, this channel is going to become sort of the headquarters for Thomas Wolfe content. I don't see a lot of other people making Thomas Wolfe content. Perhaps we can start Hemingway series as well as a Jack Kerouac series. So I'm really happy to have you along for the ride, and we will see you all in the next one.